Hi, my name is Pankaj Madan. I'm a filmmaker, and in this video, I'm going to tell you how to write a screenplay. Alright, so I have divided this video into 12 parts, where we'll be discussing what is screenplay, screenplay elements, formatting essentials, extensions, subheaders, and so on. So if you're someone who is already aware of certain things about the screenplay and you don't really want to invest your time in knowing everything, you can directly jump onto the topic of your choice. But we'll start from the basics. So what is screenplay and why is it important? Anything that you see on screen, be it a film, a web series, or a short film, there has to be a written text for it. And that text is called screenplay. Screenplay in literal term is something that can be played on screen. Well, it is not as easy as it sounds. Let me just show you with an example. Nitin walks on the road thinking about his wife. So can this be a part of the screenplay? Partially yes, partially no. While Nitin walks on the road can be a part of the screenplay, thinking about his wife will not be. Well, that's because thinking is not something that can be translated onto the screen. So as a writer, it is required of you to write text that can be visually translated onto the screen. For example, if I'll have to write this, I would say something, Nitin walks on the road smiling. And now I'll write a flashback scene where Nitin is having a good time with his wife. And then I'll come back to this scene where Nitin is walking on the road. So combining three scenes, audience will understand that while he was walking on the road, he was thinking about his wife. Well, that's not the only way to do it. As a writer, you have to be creative and find new ways to convey your story. I hope that makes sense to you. Now let's come to the second part of the question. Why screenplays are important? Well, if you want to be a part of the industry, in any form, you want to be director, you want to be actor, production designer, editor, you need to know how to read the screenplay. You may not need to know how to write it, but you need to know how to read it. Well, that's because on set, every job requires a screenplay. If you're a director, you need a screenplay to direct your movie. If you're an actor, you need a screenplay to understand your character and to deliver your dialogues. So if you don't know how to read one, it's gonna be challenging. Well, this video is gonna help you understand how to read the screenplay. Let's move on to the second part. So essentially there are 6 screenplay elements that you should know. Scene heading, action, character, parenthetical, dialogue, and transition. Once you know these 6 elements, you can read and write almost any script. So let's understand what are they and how to use them in the screenplay. So we'll start with the scene heading, which is by the way also called slugline. It is used to describe the location where the scene is happening. For example, we'll take this room. If we'll have to describe this room, how will we describe it within the screenplay? Int room day. Int is because it is happening inside. If it would be happening somewhere outside, we could have used ext, which is exterior. In our case, because the scene is happening within the room, so we'll be writing int and then where the scene is actually taking place. It could be room, it could be bedroom, or it could be cafe, hotel, anything. And then comes the time when it is happening. Not the exact time, but is it day, it is night, it is dusk, or a dawn. We can also write afternoon here, but I'll generally avoid using specific time until and unless it is necessary to the story. For example, you have a scene where the character is having lunch and something major happens in the story and you want to specify that this event occurred while the character was having a lunch. In such cases, afternoon is necessary. Otherwise, you can simply write day. Assume if this scene is happening outside at the beach, how would we describe that? Exterior, beach, day. So in this, the scene is happening exterior, outside. That's why we are using ext. And we'll use it int for interior, ext for exterior. And the place, where is it happening? It is happening at the beach. So we'll be writing beach. And then what time is it? It's a daytime or nighttime. We can also write night if the scene is happening at nighttime. Now just take an example if the scene is happening inside a car. Interior, exterior, car, day. We can also do int car day, and it's perfectly clear. See, one thing we have to understand in the screenplay, that we don't really have to hold on to the technicalities of it. The important thing in the screenplay is to provide clarity and consistency. So if you are saying int car day, it is also understandable. There is nothing wrong with that. But then every time within that screenplay, at least be consistent. So IE, by the way, is also used in scenes where the character is moving from one place to another. You can say IE, interior, exterior, because the character is moving within a scene. Now let's move on. We'll start with the scene int room day. Also remember, you don't really have to specify it's a room. It is also an apartment, so you can also say int apartment day, and there is nothing wrong with that. So like I said, it has to be clear, it has to be consistent. That's what we need to focus in the screenplay. The second important element is action. So if we'll have to describe the action, it would be like a man types on his laptop. Any description in the room you think would be essential to the story, you can add that description within the story. For example, there is a lamp behind us. A lamp is placed on a table behind him. Now, let's say another person enters the room. We would say man 2 enters the room. So when man 2 enters the room, he says some dialogue. Let's say, man 2, you're still here. Now, first of all, I'm not telling you right now what are the formatting, why man 2 is coming in the center and not to the left or the right, and why dialogues are coming in a certain way, because these are the formattings, industry standard formattings that we'll discuss later in the video. But let's just focus on how to write the screenplay. Now we have covered 4 essential elements: scene heading or a slug line, action, character, dialogue. Now there are 2 more elements that are left: parenthetical and transition. Parenthetical is a tricky thing. It's a sweet spot. You shouldn't overdo it, because it is information that you are providing to your actor, how to deliver a dialogue. The reason I'm saying you shouldn't be overdoing it is because usually actors don't like when they are being told how to do certain action until and unless it is essential to the story again. For example, man 2 enters the room and he says, "You're still here," and he does something like hand over head. You're still here. So you can type hand over head. But is it essential to the story? Can he not do some other action? Can he not be just surprised you're still here? So if hand over head is not that important, shall we write it? I don't think so. But there's very important information that we are trying to convey here. That is of disappointment, or probably you wanna say that man 2 is surprised to see man 1, which is let's say man 1. Man 2 is surprised to see man 1, because a new person entering the room and either he is disappointed or surprised, it is essential to the story. He was not expecting this guy to be here. So you shouldn't be writing the action, what he is doing, where his hands are, until and unless it is essential to the story, of course. You should write the expression of it. Here, in this case, I'll go with disappointment or surprised. I think surprised would be better. So I hope you understand parenthetical. Like I said, it's a sweet spot and you shouldn't be overdoing it. I have read so many scripts where the writer has expressed everything that they are imagining or probably visualizing while writing the script, and they have even written every single cue to the actor within the parenthetical, and it breaks the flow of the script. You have to understand one thing, that screenplay are for the readability purpose. Audience may not read it, but within the industry, people read the screenplay to be able to perform their work. So if screenplay is not crisp, if it is not helping you to visualize it, And if it is just with unnecessary information or duplicate information or with unnecessary parenthetical, you may find it hard to capture people's interest in your script. So don't overdo it. Alright, so next in line is transition. Transitions are mainly used when we are moving from one scene to another. Let's see how. In this example, we have 3 scenes. Scene 1, Scene 2, Scene 3. And we have transition between every 2 scenes. Cut to is between Scene 1 and Scene 2. Back to is between Scene 2 and Scene 3. Now, does that mean we need to have transition between every 2 scenes every time? No. In this particular case, these transitions are serving a specific purpose. Let's see what. Here we have used cut to because scene 1 is unfinished and we are abruptly moving on to the next scene. And then with the help of back to transition, we are coming back to the first scene and finishing our conversation. So what are we trying to achieve with this transition here? Well, first and foremost, we are trying to establish a non-linear structure, the flow. So transitions are mainly used to establish the flow, pace, mood and tone of the movie. Now I'll show you another way of doing the same scene but without any transition. Let's just remove cut to, back to, and move this third scene and merge it with the first scene, which anyways was a continuation of it. Now we have only 2 scenes, scene 1, scene 2. Now in this case we are finishing the scene 1 and moving on to the next scene. So we don't need a transition. So I repeat again, transitions are not required every time you are moving from one scene to another. It is only required when you are establishing a certain pace, mood, tone or flow of the movie. Let me just show you what are the other transitions that can be used within the screenplay. Now these are some of the transitions that you can use depending on how you want your story to flow. Cut to we have discussed. Fade in is used whenever we are opening a scene. It is not a mandatory thing, it's completely optional. Doesn't mean that every time you're opening a scene you have to use fade in. Similarly, fade out is used to close the scene. Fade to is not very common. It is generally used when you're fading your scene to something solid, like some color, blue, purple, yellow. Dissolve to when you're merging 2 scenes, where one scene is fading out and another scene is fading in. Back to we have discussed. Match cut, jump cut, smash cut. These are the editing terms, and if you know what they are, you will be able to use them in your screenplay. Just to give you a little bit example of that, match cut is when we are merging one shot from scene 1 to another shot. A great example of that would be 2001 Space Odyssey, where an ape throws a bone in the air and it transitions into a space station. Fade to black is used when you are fading your scene to a black screen. It is generally used when you are ending one sequence and starting a new one. For example, if your movie has multiple chapters, after every chapter you can use fade to black. Cut to black is used when you are abruptly cutting your scene to a black screen. So with this we have covered transition and therefore part 2 of the video, screenplay elements. Let's move on to part 3, formatting essentials. So in formatting essentials, we'll cover 3 things. First, how to introduce a character. Second, how to relay any important information in the screenplay. And third, how to provide sound information in the screenplay. So in this screenplay, we have 2 characters, man 1 and man 2. And every time we introduce a character in the screenplay, we have to put them in capital letter. Let's do it. Let's say man 1, man 2. And now you shall notice we have man 1 and man 2 written in the second scene as well. But here we are not putting them in caps because we have already introduced them in the first scene. Now let's assign name to them. Let's say man 1 is Nitin, man 2 is Suraj. Now throughout the script, man 2 will become Suraj and man 1 will become Nitin. Let me do it for you. Alright, so I have changed the name. Now let's assign age to the characters. Let's say Nitin is in his 30s and Suraj is in his 20s. Now there is another way that we can add age. Nitin 30s. And if we have a specific age in mind, for example, let's say he's 35. We'll do Nitin 35. Now we have used a certain format for Nitin and a different format for Suraj. Although both the formats are good, but I would avoid doing that in one screenplay. because I would prefer a consistency throughout the screenplay. So if I have used a certain format for Nitin, I would use the same format for Suraj as well. Let's say 20s. Now, do we have any specific characteristics in mind for Nitin? Let's say we want him to be geek, and we want the people who would be reading the screenplay should be able to visualize Nitin as geek. For that, we'll add some characteristics to Nitin. Let's see how. We'll write Nitin 35 wearing thick glasses. What we have is Nitin 35 years old wearing thick glasses types on his laptop. Now, whosoever would be reading it has a lot more information to visualize as compared to our previous version where we said a man types on his laptop. By adding such details to the character, we solidify the character. So these information helps in the visualization of the character. We just have to define it once, and throughout the screenplay, his characteristics will remain the same. Now, let's look, are there any key information in the story that we want to pass on to our audience? Like we discussed, a lamp is placed on a table behind him is essential to the story. Let's say lamp is the key element in the story and we want to draw audience attention towards it. So what we'll do is we'll put it in capital letter. Now we know how to introduce a character and how to highlight an important information, a key information in the screenplay. Now what we are left with is sound effects. Like we discussed, screenplays are written for the visual medium. So if we are adding some sound information, some audio information in the screenplay, we'll have to ensure that it pops out. Let's see how to do it. Currently, we don't have that information in the screenplay. Let us just add some. Let's say Nitin and Suraj run, a car horn blares. So what we are trying to say here is, while Nitin and Suraj were running on the street, a car horn started blaring. And the reason we have put it in caps is because it is the sound effect. And similarly, whenever you see a sound effect, first time characters, any key element in the story, this is how you're going to put them in capital letter to grab reader's attention towards it. So with this, we have covered part 3 of the video, formatting essentials. Now it's time to move on to part 4, extensions. So extensions are basically used alongside characters. And there are total 6 types of extension: voiceover, off camera, off screen, pre-lap, subtitle, and text. Let me show you what are they and how to use them in your screenplay. Nitin types on his laptop. We have already covered that in our previous section. But what we have done now is we have added a voiceover describing Nitin. He's Nitin Shastri. He's making a proposal for his startup. So when Nitin will type on his laptop, we'll hear a voiceover. So voiceover is mainly a narrative technique where we don't see the character, but we can hear them. You must have seen in films where the character is walking or sleeping or driving, and there is a voiceover describing the character, his circumstances, or his journey. So there are various ways a voiceover can be used. It can be used to relay information to the audience, it can be used to show the passage of time, or it can also be used to establish the scene or a scenario. Here in this example, I have used man's voice. Well, you can write woman's voice if you want a woman narrator, and you can simply write narrator if you don't want to specify the gender. Now let's see what else do we have. The next is OC, off camera. So let's assume there is a person sitting with me across the table. In an establishing scene, you saw both of us sitting together in this room. But for this particular shot, while the camera is on me, this person is saying the dialogue. For that particular dialogue, we'll add OC along with its name. That would mean, although the character is speaking the dialogue, but he's not on camera right now. Let's see an example. In this conversation between Suraj and Nitin, Nitin says, "I'm doing it, it's almost finished." And we have OC along with its name. That would indicate that while Nitin is saying this dialogue, but the camera is not on him. The next is OS, off screen. I've seen people using OS and OC interchangeably, although there is a subtle difference between the two. While OC means the person is not on the camera, but he is in the scene. OS means the person is not in the scene and we can only hear them. Now let's suppose there is a person in another room and they are talking to us. For that particular dialogue, we'll add OS along with their name. That's because we don't see them in the scene, but we can hear them. I'll show you an example. In this scene, when Nitin is leaving the house, we hear a woman's voice saying, "Have something to eat." So we have added OS along with it. Means the person is not in the scene, but we can hear them. Now if it is clear to you, we can move on to our next extension, Prelap. Prelap is mainly used when a dialogue appears before the scene. I'll show you an example. In this scene, Nitin and Suraj are running, followed by a dialogue. But there is prelap with it. That indicates that the conversation is happening in the next scene. But we have started hearing it in a scene prior to that. This is a narrative technique that writers often use to provide smooth transition between two scenes. I hope it is clear to you. The next in line is subtitle. Now let's say your movie is in English and you have a French character in your movie, and that character doesn't know how to speak English. Now, how would you tell your audience what the character is saying, assuming your audience don't understand French? You will use subtitles. I'll show you how. In this scene, Nitin and Suraj comes out of the building. A random man appears with a phone in hand, and the man starts speaking in French. Now, how will we show it? We have added subtitle along with the name, and in the parenthetical, we have added the language he is speaking in. So anybody who would be reading this screenplay would understand, okay, this person is speaking in French. If you'll see, I have written the dialogue in English, because as a writer, you don't have to go to Google and look for the French translation of the dialogue. You write in the language the story is set in, because eventually the people who would be reading your script also understand the same language as you do. And that's why we mention French in parenthetical, because translation will be taken care during the production and post-production of the movie. I hope it is clear to you. Now let's move on to our next extension, text. I did not use this extension within the screenplay because it is not commonly used, but I'll explain you what it is. Now let's say we have a character ABC, and he says this dialogue, "Hi, how are you?" And now we'll add this extension, text, with it. So whenever this character will speak this dialogue, a text will appear on the screen. Now, how it is different from subtitle? In subtitle, the character was speaking in French language and the text was in English. It makes sense. However, in this case, the character is speaking in English and the text is also in English. It doesn't really add on. However, there is one scenario where it can fit in. If your character is speaking over black screen, it is good to have text in that case for clarity. So I hope this is clear to you, and with this we have completed all our extensions, and now it is time to move on to our next topic, subheader. So subheaders are nothing but a subheading under the scene heading. I'll show you an example. Look at the scene 1 of example 1. We have already established that Nitin and Suraj are talking to each other. Now I've added this one more detail. Suraj heads to the kitchen, followed by a new scene heading, interior, kitchen, day. Now the question is, do we even need to mention interior? Because in the scene before, we have already established that we are inside the apartment. So in this case, we don't need interior because that is given. Similarly, day. Because it is a continuation of a scene before, we don't even need to mention day. So we are simply left with kitchen. And this is our subheader. Let's say this scene is not in a continuation of a scene before. Let's say this scene is happening at night time. We could have said kitchen dash night. Now what this means is, if your film is taking place at different places inside the apartment, you don't need to write scene heading every time. Instead, use subheaders. If the scene is taking place in the bathroom, just write bathroom. If it is happening in the bedroom, write bedroom. And if there is a difference of time, mention that. Now with this, I want to show you one more example. Let's say your film is taking place in 2 apartments. Now if you look at the example 2, we have 2 apartments, Nitin's apartment and Suraj's apartment. Now it would be great if you can just pause this video and go through the screenplay once, because it would be easier for me to explain. Now if you have gone through it, you must have noticed that there are 2 scenes taking place in the lobby. One is in Nitin's lobby, another is in Suraj's lobby. Now if you simply write lobby, it can not just create confusion for the reader, it will also greatly impact the planning and execution of the movie. So whenever your film is taking place in 2 different apartments, be specific. In this case, we'll write Nitin's lobby. And here, it would be Suraj's lobby. With this, we are trying to avoid any confusion for our reader. And when this screenplay will go in the production, planning and execution will be smooth. Now, if it is clear to you, we can move on to time transition. So under time transitions, we are going to cover the following: later, moments later, continuous, flashback, flash forward, and montages. So later and moments later are mainly used when we have to show the passage of time or timing of events are significant to the story. Let's understand with an example. I've written this sequence for you where Nitin gets a call from a wrong number. He picks up the call, talks to the woman, and then disconnects. Moments later, when he's in the dining room, his phone rings again. And moments later, when he's in the bedroom, he again receives a call. And if you'll see later in the day, when he's in the cafe sitting with Sneha, his phone rings again. So what are we trying to indicate with the use of later and moments later? Is that he's constantly receiving this call and someone from the other end of the phone is constantly bugging him. Now let's say we remove moments later from here. Now we don't know when it is happening. It could be the next day or next week. And this would reduce the significance of the scene. Now with the use of moments later and later, we are establishing that the timing of the events are significant to the story. Now the question comes, where is it appropriate to use? Here if you'll see, we have used in the scene heading, interior, cafe, later. And in this example, we have used in the subheader. Now let's remove dining room from here. This would mean that the location has not changed. The previous location was living room, means moments later when he's still in the living room, he receives a call. So whenever there is no location change, we can use it independently. So now we have three places where we have used scene heading, subheader, and independently within the same location. Now if it is clear to you, we can move on to our next topic, continuous. For continuous, I have used the same sequence I used in the previous example, but I have made a small change by adding this transition cut to and break the scene into two. Now if you'll see, the first part is happening in the living room and second part is happening in the bedroom. With bedroom, we have used continuous, means no time has passed between the two scenes. And this subheader indicates that although the location has changed, but action is a continuation of the previous scene. Now read carefully through this scene. While his location has changed from living room to bedroom, Nitin is still on the same call. In short, we'll only use continuous when the location changes but the action carries forward. Now if it is clear to you, we can move on to flashbacks. So now to understand flashback, we first have to look at the scenarios where we can use it. First scenario would be where we have to show characters' backstory or we have to reveal some past information to the audience. One scenario would be where we have to show that the character is in nostalgic state. Let's look at this example. In this example, we see that Nitin is in his apartment staring at an old photo. Then in the next scene, we see a young Nitin laughing with his friends. Then we are coming back to the present day where Nitin's eyes are brimmed with tears. Now with the use of this flashback, we have shown Nitin's past memory to the audience and we have also established that our character is in nostalgic state. Now let's look at the formatting. We have used flashback to enter the flashback and back to present to exit the flashback. And that's not just the only way to do it. You can also type flashback in the scene heading, and when you are coming to the present day, you can just mention present day in the scene heading itself. Now let's say if you have multiple scenes within the same flashback, like in this example. First we see younger Nitin laugh with his friends in the school hallway. And then in the canteen, he is playing with his friends. Now you can use begin flashback to enter the flashback, followed by whatever flashback scenes you have, and then end it with end flashback dot. Now these are the three ways you can write flashback in your screenplay. Flashback to back to present, flashback in the scene heading, begin flashback and end flashback. Now if it is clear to you, we can move on to flash forward. Now the only difference between flashback and flash forward is in flashback we are looking at the past, whereas in flash forward we are looking at the future. And the scenarios where we can use flash forward is probably a character is having a dream or he has some premonitions about future. Let's look at this example. Now in this sequence you will see Nitin and Sneha are sitting in a cafe engaged in conversation. He suddenly notices an old couple and appears distracted. Then in flash forward we see a park where Nitin and Sneha in their 80s holds each other hands. Back to present, Nitin glances at Sneha and smile. Now in this scene, the flash forward gives us a glimpse of Nitin's character, his dreams of future and his love for Sneha. Now just look at the formatting once. It is similar to flashback. In some screenplays, you will see that flashback and flash forwards are written in the right side. Well, I would not suggest that because we generally write transitions in the right side. And as we discussed, that transition means how we are moving from one scene to another. Whereas flashback and flash forwards are the information to the reader as to where we are in the scene. And just like flashback, there are three ways we can write flash forward in our screenplay. Instead of writing flashback, you can just write flash forward. Now, if it is clear to you, it is time to move on to montages. So how to use montage and why to use it? Well, there are several reasons why we use montage. Sometimes it is used for character transformation. Sometimes it is used for time transition. It is also used over the narration. And most often it is also used for stylish reasons to set the tone of the movie. Now let's see how to use it. It's very simple. You just have to type begin montage followed by your actions. Now in this example, you see the first action is Nitin jogs, his face determined. And the next action is Nitin studies at his desk surrounded by books. And both the actions, if you see, have scene heading. That's because both the actions are taking place at different location. If your actions are taking place in the same location, you just have to type the location, scene heading, followed by multiple actions. But just like in this case, if your actions are happening at different location, every time with that action, you have to type scene heading. So once you are done writing all the actions, you can end it by typing end montage. So yeah, you can enter the montage by typing begin montage, and you can exit it by typing end montage. And with this, we have covered our time transition. Now it's time to move on to our next topic, text on screen. What is text on screen and when do we need it? Well, as the name suggests, a text that appears on screen is called text on screen. And whenever we want to convey some important information to the audience, be it a location, a year the story is set in, or any significant information that is important to the narrative, that is when we need text on screen. And there are so many ways that you can write text in your screenplays. Some of them are title, title card, chyron, super. But I would like to keep it simple. And for this video, we'll use only title and super. And no matter what screenplay are you writing, be it a short film, feature film, or a web series, these two elements are all you need. Let me show you an example how to use them. So this is the same sequence that we wrote in flash forward. Now let's say we want our movie's name to appear after this dialogue. So how will we do that? We'll type title, colon, followed by movie's name. Now this is a romantic sequence, so we can say something like falling in love. Now, if you want your movie's name to appear in all caps, you can type in all caps. Otherwise, if you want the first alphabet to be in caps and rest to be small, you can type it that way. So howsoever you want your movie's name to appear on the screen, you can type in the similar way. Now, falling in love will appear on the screen over the image. Whatever visual content will be there on the screen. Now, what if we want a title to appear over the black screen? Now, there are two ways to do that. Let's see the first one. Now, after the previous scene, we can fade our screen to black. And then we can write our title, falling in love. Now that's one way. We can fade our previous scene to the black and then we can write our title. And there is another way. Instead of fade to black, we can just type over black and write title, falling in love. So now the title will appear over the black screen. So this is how you write title in your screenplay. Personally, I have reserved title for movie titles only, and for any other text I use super. But you will come across screenplays where the writer has used title, title card, chyron for all kind of text. I personally find it confusing. Therefore, I have reserved title for movie titles, and for all kind of text I use super. Now let me show you an example how to use super in the screenplay. Now let's say instead of title you want some information to appear on the screen like location or time. So we'll type super. Let's say it is happening in Paris. So we'll type Paris and then 15 years ago. You can also type it in the next line if that's how you want it to appear on the screen. So Paris 15 years ago. This is what will appear on the screen over the image. Now if you want your text to appear over the black screen, just like we did in title, we'll type over black followed by super and text. And we can also use fade to black like we did in title. So if it is clear to you, we can move on to our next topic, script convention. So in this video, we are going to cover 3 script conventions: beat, dashes, and ellipses. So if you're a writer, you anyways have to understand it well. But if you're an actor, you also need to pay good attention here, because these conventions are used in dialogues and they are used to communicate complex emotions and thoughts. And if you understand them well, it will help you to interpret these dialogues and the emotions behind them. So let's start with our first convention, beat. Now, whenever you see a beat in the screenplay, it means pause. Now, there are two ways we can use beat, one in the dialogue within parenthetical and one in the action line. Now, in this dialogue, Nitin says, you know what, followed by beat, and then you should come with me to the US. Now, through this beat, we have created a pause between the dialogue, and I've used it to create an emotional impact in the dialogue. Now, whenever an actor will deliver this dialogue, he will say this line and then he'll take a pause before delivering the second line. Now, there is another way we can use beat, that is in the action line. So after this dialogue, Sneha looks at Nitin in disbelief. And then we have created a moment of silence between the two where Sneha processes her emotion before responding. So if it is clear to you, we can move on to dashes. So there are two types of dashes that we use, single dash and double dash. Some people also use M dash instead of double dash, but I generally avoid it because there is no dedicated key in the laptop for M dash. And I find it more convenient to use double dash instead. So let's just understand with an example when to use what. So whenever a person hesitates or stammers while speaking and we want to show abrupt break in the dialogue, that is when we use single dash. Let's look at this example where Sneha says, oh, okay, and what am I supposed to do there? So you shall see, whenever there is an unintentional pause in the dialogue, we have used single dash. So it is clear with the way Sneha is speaking that she is hesitating. And now look at the second example where Nitin says, you can find a job there. He's stammering. And that's why there is a break in job. So single dash can be used within the word or between two words as well. So double dash is used whenever there is an interruption, either external or self. Now in this example, Nitin says, I was thinking if you can, and then we have a double dash. That means the other person is interrupting. And then Sneha says, come to US with you. And if you notice that we have used double dash at the start of the dialogue, that means the person is not just interrupting, she is also completing his sentence. Now, what if the character only interrupts and does not complete the sentence and say something different altogether? Well, in that case, we won't use double dash in front of the dialogue. Like in this example, Sneha says, oh sorry, I thought, followed by double dash. That means Nitin is interrupting. Now, Nitin says, do you want me to? But we don't have double dash in front of his dialogue. That's because he's not completing her sentence. Now there is this another example of external interruption. No, of course not. I have followed by double dash. That means interruption. But if you'll pay attention, there is no character interrupting her this time. It is an external noise. So be it an external noise or a character, whenever there is an interruption in the dialogue, we'll use double dash. Now I want to show you one more example. Here, if you see, we have used double dash in between the dialogue, not at the end or the start. This is because the person is interrupting herself. Let's look at this dialogue. Sneha says, are you proposing me? So we have used double dash between the two sentences. That is because she was saying something else and then she interrupted herself and said something else. So that's why we used double dash. So if it is clear to you, we can move on to our next topic, ellipsis. So ellipsis is represented by 3 dots and it is used whenever there is an unfinished thought. A person is hesitating or holding back emotions or unable to say something or leave something unsaid. Let's look at some of the example. In this first example, Sneha says, when I was a kid, I used to think when I'll grow up, I'll be someone. But followed by 3 dots. Now it is clear that the sentence is unfinished. And I've used these 3 dots to communicate that Sneha is hesitating and she's unable to finish her sentence. Now let's look at the second example where she says, you don't understand. I may be someone in your eyes, but in mine, followed by 3 dots, and then she says the rest. So as we can see that the sentence is finished here, but after a substantial pause. And I've used these 3 dots to communicate that Sneha is holding back her emotions and she's unable to express them. Now let's look at the last example where Nitin says, you're being a little, followed by 3 dots. Means he's unable to finish his sentence. But in the next line, Sneha says, harsh on myself. And if you notice, we have 3 dots in front of her dialogue. That is because she is completing Nitin's sentence. Now we have used a similar example in double dash. But unlike double dash, Sneha is not interrupting Nitin. If she would be interrupting Nitin, we would have used double dash instead of triple dot. But here, Nitin is unable to finish his sentence, and after a substantial pause, Sneha completes his sentence. And that's why we have used triple dot. Now, if it is clear to you, we can move on to our next topic, page division. Before we jump onto the topic, let me tell you that everything that we have covered so far is sufficient enough for you to read and write any screenplay. And the topics we are covering now will give you a thorough understanding of how screenplays are used in the filmmaking process. And for that, we'll start with page division. Now, every page of the screenplay is divided into 8 parts. 1 by 8, 2 by 8, 3 by 8, and so on. And this division helps us in identifying the length of each scene. Now, the question is, why is it important to know the scene length? Well, tomorrow when you will be on a film set, you will notice that different teams come together to make a film. And there are thousands of people working together. And at that time, it becomes essential to keep everybody on the same page. And to make that happen, every morning, each team is given a sheet that tells them what task are they going to perform within that day. And that includes the scene they are going to shoot as well as the length of each scene. Now, let's say on day 1, you are shooting 4 scenes and on day 2, you are shooting just 2 scenes. But these 4 scenes are spread out in 3 pages. And these 2 scenes are spread out in 7 pages, 7.5 or 7, 3 by 8. Now, with this much information only, we know that day 2 is going to take more time than day 1. Why? Because the number of pages are more. Although we are shooting only 2 scenes as compared to day 1 where we are shooting 4 scenes. But what matters is the length of each scene. And that's when page division becomes important, because it gives you precise length of each scene. Now, if it is clear to you, we can move on to our next topic, formatting. So when you look at the screenplay, you must have noticed that scene heading always appear in the left side and in all capital letter. Character always appear in the center. Parenthetical always appear within parentheses. Dialogue below that, and transition appears in the right side. But why is it so? Because these are the industry standard formatting, and everywhere in the world, screenplays are written in the same way. And because of these formattings, it is assumed that 1 page of the screenplay is equal to 1 minute of the screen time. Although it's not a rule, it's just an estimation, and in some cases it can also vary. For example, if you are writing a song sequence or a fight sequence, on a screenplay it can be 1 or 2 lines. But we know that song and fight sequence can take up to several minutes. Now let's say you're writing a drama, and if you have 120 pages of the screenplay, chances are that your film will be somewhere around 2 hours. That's because 1 page of the screenplay is equal to 1 minute of the screen time. Now, there is one more thing that you need to know about screenplay. That is, all screenplays are written either in Courier or Courier New Font. And the font size has to be 12. But don't worry, you don't have to do all of this manually, because there are softwares that comes with standard templates and you just need to follow those templates. The software that I'm using is Final Draft, and it's a paid version. But if you are new to screenwriting and you don't want to spend right now, you can also use Celtex because it offers some free basic plan. So with this, we have covered everything that we need to know about industry standard formatting. So let's move on to our next topic, spec script versus shooting script. So what is spec script? Well, any script that you write is a spec script until it becomes a shooting script. Well, I'll give you an example. Let's say you have an idea of a film and you decide to write a story. Then you write your screenplay and decide to pitch it. Then you go to a producer and they read your screenplay and they're like, wow, let's turn it into a film. And at that moment, your spec script is ready to become a shooting script. But before that, it is just a spec script. Spec is a short form of speculative. Anything that you are writing with this uncertainty whether it will ever be made or not, you're writing a speculative script. But once your script gets a go-ahead, it is ready to become a shooting script. But how are we going to make spec script a shooting script? Well, by adding just 2 details. 1, technical detail. 2, scene number. If you have any technical details like camera angle in mind, music or editing, you can add in your spec script along with the scene number and it has become a shooting script. Why scene number is important? Because on film set, people communicate using scene number. Now I split this screen into 2 parts. On left, you are seeing a spec script and on right, a shooting script. And the only difference between the two are the technical details and the scene numbers that we have in shooting script. If you remember in the beginning of the video, I told you that scripts are for readability purpose. Well, I want to be a little bit more precise here. Spec scripts are for readability purpose, whereas shooting script is used to make film. I repeat, spec scripts are for readability purpose. People read it to decide whether to make a film or not. But once it is decided, we turn it into a shooting script and then it is used to make a film. Now it's time to move on to our next topic, which is colored screenplays. Well, in my experience, I have not seen many people using color screenplays, but I think it's a very useful tool, especially for two reasons. One, it helps in avoiding unnecessary errors. Second, it keeps everybody in the team on the same page. I'll tell you how. So on the screen, you can see different colors and each color is associated with a version number. So what happens when your script is finalized and logged, it is then printed on a paper and then distributed among the team. So for the first time when it is printed on a white paper and is also assigned a version number, which in this case would be version 1. But let's say during production you want to make certain changes to your script. So once you make those changes, a new version will be created, version 2. Then this new version will be reprinted on a blue paper and get distributed. But why blue? Because version 2 is associated with blue color. Now let's say if your changes are limited to just 1 or 2 scenes, then only those 2 pages will be reprinted in blue color, rest whole of the screenplay will remain in white. Now I'll tell you how it is useful in real life scenarios. Let's say during production, director says that today we are going to shoot page 10, scene number 13. Now when person 1 opens the screenplay, his page 10 is printed in blue color. And when person 2 opens the screenplay, his page 10 is printed in pink color. So if you understand this color scheme, we know that person 2 has an updated version and person 1 needs to update his version. Why? Because person 2 has a pink color page, which is version 3, and person 1 has a blue color page, which is version 2. And like I said, colored screenplays helps us in avoiding errors and it keeps everybody on the same page. Now with this, we have finished the last module of our video. Now before you go, I would like to give you 5 screenwriting tips that I have learned in my years of screenwriting. Tip number 1, do not relay the same information twice. Because the second time, if you're relaying the same information, you're not giving anything new to the audience. And that counts as a dull moment in the screenplay. So avoid it as long as it is not crucial to the narrative. Tip number 2 would be, do not state the obvious. You must have heard, show, don't tell. Well, that's because when you show something on the screen, you are engaging your audience in the visuals. For example, if a character is sad, he's sitting helpless and hopeless. Well, now, audience is perceiving that information just by looking at the visuals. But let's say if a character says, I'm sad. You're disengaging the audience because now they don't have to perceive anything. You have already stated it for them and the visual becomes irrelevant. So avoid stating the obvious. Tip number 3 would be avoid short talks. Hi, how are you? I'm good. How are you? I'm good too. Don't do that. Until unless your character is socially awkward or they're meeting for the first time and they're hesitant to speak to each other. If that's not the case, be more creative with your conversations. Tip number 4 would be underline any stress word. Let's say you want to say, I want to go there. And as a writer, you want to put emphasis on a certain word. I want to go there. I want to go there. I want to go there. Although all the 3 deliveries means the same thing, but every delivery has a certain significance. So as a writer, if you think your dialogue need to be delivered with emphasis on a certain word, underline it. Well, the last and final tip would be remove unnecessary scene or dialogue from the story. But how would you know that? Well, if you're not sure whether a certain scene or dialogue is contributing to the story, remove them. And read your screenplay without it. If you think your story is intact and you're still able to convey what you intend to, that means the excluded part was not adding value to the story. So with this, I've shared everything that I have learned and applied in my screenwriting process. I hope it is helpful to you. If yes, please like the video and share it with people who can benefit from it. And if you have any questions for me, you can also put them in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer them. And if you'd like to see more of such videos where we'll be discussing film related stuff, you can subscribe to this channel. Thank you. I'll see you in the next video.